What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you with another mock draft reaction, basically 2023 Dynasty Rookie Mock Draft with landing spots. Today we are looking at Matt Miller of ESPN's two-round mock draft that he released, and we're going to be doing a 2023 first-round Dynasty mock draft in superflex format based on the draft capital, the landing spots of Matt Miller's mock. I think it's a good exercise. We've done these before. Of course, if you guys are new around here, hit the like and subscribe button, all that good stuff. It's definitely a good exercise to take guys like Matt Miller who are completely disconnected from the fantasy community, who are only NFL draft analysts, because we usually see a trend with like fantasy guys doing mock drafts where there's a lot more skill talent versus a guy like Matt Miller who's more in tune with the draft class as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. And as fantasy guys, we can easily point to when a team, maybe needs a receiver or needs a running back or, obviously needs a quarterback, but that's a separate issue, needs a tight end, because we basically look at, where's their fantasy output coming on a seasonal basis? From an NFL perspective, they're going to look at the holistic view of the team. So we might see a team, for example, that we're pegging, they're going to take a receiver round 1, they're going to take a receiver round 2, and they end up going, defensive line and linebacker because those may be more, valuable needs for them in that spot. So it's pretty interesting, seeing that perspective, because we're so focused on how is it exactly going to affect fantasy. These guys more so focused on how's it going to affect their real life, wins and loss record.
Yeah, and again, in this mock draft, we'll get into it. Not a lot of running backs came off the board, only 2 in the first, 64 picks or whatever. Less receivers than we're accustomed to seeing. A lot of tight ends, a couple quarterbacks, but we will get into all of that after the intro. As always, leave a like, subscribe if you guys enjoy, but let's get right into it. All right, so we are just going to do a first-round draft. Of course, we only have 2 rounds of an NFL mock draft from Matt Miller to work with. If we had a 3-rounder or a 4-rounder or something, we might have done a 2-rounder here. But like I said, only 2 running backs went in the first 64 picks, so it's definitely going to limit the player pool that we have here. We're not going to draft anybody that was not in the mock draft, so I'm not going to guess, maybe Zach Charbonnet would have went in the 3rd round or something. We're just going to cover guys that went in this mock draft, and you guys can see it on the screen, link down below in the description for the full mock draft if you guys want to go check it out. But you can see some of the picks there. Bryce Young going 1st overall to the Colts, Will Levis 2nd overall to the Texans, so on and so forth. So we're going to start off with the 101 in the Dynasty Rookie Mock Draft. You guys should be able to see the whole board on the side of the screen there, and you can see players who are available as we go along. The 101 I'm going to start with here, and we're going to go running back from Texas, Bijan Robinson, obviously will be the 101, especially in this scenario where basically, I was talking to you before this, but this is basically a 99th percentile outcome for Bijan Robinson and people who are holding the 101, because not only does he go to the Philadelphia Eagles, which is a great landing spot, a great offense, he goes 10th overall, which is very high draft capital. We assume this is the workhorse of this team. He's going to get everything under the sun as far as, rushing work, receiving work, goal line work. Nothing to be misconstrued here, as opposed to maybe if you went in the early 2nd round or late 1st round or something.
Yeah, it's kind of like the best of both worlds. Obviously, we talk about we want a high potent offense. The Eagles have shown, on the road to the Super Bowl this year that they have a great offensive line. They have a great quarterback, great play calling, great receiving talent on the outside, to the point where Bijan Robinson's a luxury piece for them. If they add a guy like Bijan Robinson to this offense, I wouldn't be shocked if this guy's averaging, 5.3 yards per pop, 35, 40 receptions out of the backfield as a rookie. So if you're talking about that level of landing spot, not to mention we're also talking about the draft capital, 10th overall, you can compare, some of the other landing spots like Buffalo, Dallas, maybe Cincinnati if they move on from Joe Mixon. But all those, landing spots would be with, 20-something overall picks. Them taking Bijan at 10th overall to the fantasy community would signify the fact that they're viewing this guy as, a 300 touch per game or 300 touch per season type of workhorse right off the bat. If you're going to take a running back that high, realistically, you only got 5 years with them. So from a team perspective, if you are going to take a running back that high, he is going to get all the work possible. And with a guy like Bijan Robinson, he showed throughout his college career that he can handle that type of workload. So, yeah, I think he's the clear-cut 101. I think this is a guy that's probably going to find his way to, the mid to late 1st for a lot of your startups, especially in superflex leagues, but in one quarterback leagues, a top 4, top 3 overall pick. And I think he's well worth the hype. He's a fantastic prospect. He is an absolute alien. So, yeah, the pretty clear 101 off the board, Bijan Robinson should basically be the 101 in all of your drafts for the most part, unless you're in like a 3 quarterback league. However, this is the clear 102 in my opinion. First overall draft capital to the Indianapolis Colts, the clear quarterback one in this class, in my opinion, in your opinion, a lot of people's opinions. Bryce Young out of Alabama. Showcase this year exactly what he brings to the table, off script ability, accurate down the field, kind of that Deshaun Watson playmaker-esque feel when you watch this guy play. Obviously, left college on that big note with that huge game he left against the Kansas State Wildcats. And I mean, this guy's just a phenomenal talent. If you can get a potential game changer at quarterback, this is a guy who's going to find his way probably into the top 15 picks of your startup drafts, with the opportunity to potentially be, a top 8 overall pick if he has, a very, very good rookie season. So I'm all for it. Appreciating value here. Bryce Young, realistically, even if he had, a bad rookie season, he would still be a second-round pick given the age, given the talent, given the draft capital. But of course, taking this type of piece at the 102 in your rookie draft is going to hold a lot of advantage over the rest of the field. Because realistically, if you're getting this 102 top 15 overall startup pick versus somebody who's picking, 110, you're looking at a guy going in the 8th, 9th round of startups versus a guy like Bijan Robinson and Bryce Young going in the top 15 picks of startups.
Yeah, exactly. And Bryce Young, size is the major concern, but we have to assume if he goes first overall, then maybe he bulks up to 205 for the combine and kind of mullies that concern a little bit. Kyler Murray, for what it's worth, is about 207 pounds. So if Bryce Young can crack 200, 205 pounds, he'll probably not have, as many size concerns. Yeah, he's a little bit shorter than the average quarterback, but we saw Kyler go first overall a couple years ago, and it seems like the NFL is shifting away from like the only tall quarterbacks kind of mantra. And Bryce Young is just so good in every other area that you can kind of forgive the size concerns. If this guy was 6'4", 210 pounds, he would be the clear-cut 101 first overall pick in dynasty drafts, in the NFL draft, and teams would be calling Chicago right now to bust down the doors to get access to him.
Yeah, no, if he had, that elite size, you could be looking at a guy, well regarded within the, Andrew Luck, Trevor Lawrence type of territory. But obviously the size isn't, comparable to those guys, but the talent clearly is, in my opinion. Talking a little bit about the landing spot, obviously landing in Indianapolis, you got a new coaching regime, potentially, whether it's Jeff Saturday brought back, whether they hire a new coach. You got, Michael Pittman on the outside, Jonathan Taylor in the backfield, an offensive line that, while it didn't perform this past year, has shown in years past that it has, an elite level of play to it. So I do think from a pure nesting spot, landing spot type of perspective for Bryce Young, especially going first overall, I think this is one of the better spots that he could possibly go to.
Yeah, and I think if Bryce Young comes in right away and commands the huddle like he did at Alabama, the offensive line, everybody around you kind of plays a little bit better as a result of that. And we saw that even, with Jacksonville this year, Trevor Lawrence has made that offensive line a lot better than maybe their talent would dictate. And I think Bryce Young, given the talent on that offensive line, could really elevate those guys back up to the top of the league where they were in years past. So I'm on the board here with the 103. And to me, again, I've finished grading these quarterbacks. So I know, at least in my own opinion, who I value the highest. And as much as I like the high draft capital, 16th overall for Anthony Richardson, as much as I like, Will Levis going 2nd overall to the Houston Texans, I just think CJ Stroud's a tier better of a quarterback prospect. CJ Stroud goes 9th overall to the Carolina Panthers in this mock draft, working alongside Frank Reich. Now they're in Carolina. They invested in their offensive line with Ike Ekwonu at the top of the draft last year. We have to assume, DJ Moore sticks around. Maybe you get something out of Terrace Marshall. They'll probably address receiver maybe in the 2nd round of this mock draft or whatever. CJ Stroud, to me, just behind Bryce Young, he's just an assassin. If you give him time, man, this dude will pick you apart. He didn't run a whole lot at Ohio State. He didn't need to run a whole lot. And we saw in the Georgia game that he can do it if he needs to. But for the most part, this guy's a pass-first quarterback, which I think is something that, for specifically DJ Moore fantasy managers, we've been sorely lacking. A guy that can just get the ball to DJ Moore, get him the ball in space, let him do his thing. We saw at the beginning of 2021 when Sam Darnold was playing at a high level, and even when he came in this year, that DJ Moore can perform as a high-level fantasy receiver when he has a quarterback like this. And I think CJ Stroud, again, if we had a guy that was a very mobile quarterback, we would be talking about somebody that should probably be the locked and loaded first overall pick. He doesn't have size concerns, 6'3", 215 pounds, been one of the top 5 Heisman voting candidates the last 2 years. He's very, very good. He's very, very productive. Yeah, he had great talent around him at Ohio State, but that talent around him was always accentuated by the fact that CJ Stroud was so good at getting the ball on time, on target to those guys.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're looking at, the macro perspective here, you're getting a top 10, drafted quarterback landing, like you said, with Frank Reich now with the Carolina Panthers. they are really, really building a solid foundation there. The offensive line was one of the better performing units in terms of expectation that we could have imagined this past year. Almost got them to the playoffs on their own for the most part. I mean, their offensive line was really cooking down the stretch. Obviously, DJ Moore has established himself as a top 15 level wide receiver in the NFL. You land CJ Stroud here. Obviously, like you kind of said, can sit in the pocket, deliver some strikes, and overall raises the entire ceiling of this entire offense from a fantasy perspective. So definitely a valid pick here at 103. 104, you kind of mentioned, you're possibly frisking with the tantalizing potential of this next guy. And I got to bite the bullet here. I just think if he gets this type of draft capital, top 20 draft capital, very good landing spot with Washington, I think Anthony Richardson has to be the pick. Yes. Is he more volatile as a prospect compared to the other quarterbacks, especially going in the high end of this draft? Will Levis, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud. Absolutely. He is a risk because he didn't really show this level of polish in college. However, you're talking about a 6'4", 225-pound, legit 4-4 type of athlete. We're basically looking at a worse prospect version of what kind of Justin Fields represented, where the polish wasn't exactly there. Maybe the accuracy kind of let him down at times, a lot more for Anthony Richardson than it did for Justin Fields. But you saw that if he does hit his ceiling, he could be a legitimate top 5 overall startup pick. And when we're talking about the offensive situation in Washington, you have 3 legit wide receivers on the outside, a legit run game, a better performing offensive line down the stretch last year. I think if you were to handpick a spot not in the top 10 for Anthony Richardson, I honestly think Washington may be the best spot for him. And landing him here, obviously, you have the volatility factor where if he does perform, you're taking a little bit of a risk, or if doesn't perform, he'll take a little bit of risk. But if he does perform and he has, an RG3 level rookie season, obviously, that's a little bit hyperbolic. But if that were to be the case, this is a legitimate guy going in the top 5 of drafts next year.
Yeah, I mean, him falling out of the top 10, I don't think would be a terrible thing, because outside of, I would say, Atlanta and probably Detroit, there's not a ton of landing spots I love for Anthony Richardson, because the thing that makes me nervous about him is what's above the shoulders. Because when he performed poorly at the beginning of games, he absolutely crumbled against Kentucky, against USF. If he couldn't get in rhythm, if he couldn't run the ball and play the game that he wanted to play, he got absolutely flustered. And we're talking about a guy completing like 40% of his passes in those games. And that's like Zach Wilson versus the New England Patriots bad. Yeah. Like we can't have that with Anthony Richardson. His inaccuracy, you can't sugarcoat it. It's bad. It's not just like it needs development. Like, it actually just stinks at this moment. He needs mechanical work upon mechanical work. He's doing that by the sounds of it for the combine. If he goes this high in the NFL draft, you got to assume that teams are comfortable with the work ethic and the IQ and stuff that he provides them in interviews. So I do actually think this is a good situation for him. Let him and probably Sam Howell battle it out in training camp to see who the starter ends up being. I would expect Sam Howell to probably win that out, at least in the short term. I think he was a better prospect, even though he went in the 5th round versus Anthony Richardson going in the 1st round here. But it should be an interesting landing spot nonetheless for Anthony Richardson. I actually think the best landing spot he could go to outside the top 10, bias aside, is probably my team with Tampa Bay, because I do expect us to bring in a veteran of some kind, whether it's like a Jacoby Brissett or something. And then you put Richardson behind a guy like Brissett, let him learn, let him play behind a good offensive line with good receiving talent to throw to. He's going to be interesting, man. He's really going to sink or swim, I think, in the NFL. I think we're talking about a guy that is either an elite quarterback in fantasy or a guy that is an absolute stone cold bust. I do not think that we're going to get a middle ground with Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, and it's weird with him, right? Because the range of outcomes is so polarizing. Like you said, he's either going to fall flat on his face or he's going to be a top 5 to 10 overall startup pick. I don't really see an in between, because if he shows any type of flashes, which would be on the bull case side, people are going to prop up the board because of the athletic talent, because of the arm talent that he shows on display in spurts at times in college. But if he can really unlock that in the NFL, he can be an absolute game changer. So yeah, definitely not for the faint of heart. If you guys, love safety, if you will, he's not your guy. But I mean, like we say at FSC all the time, you play to win your league. You play to get the best accrual of talent, accrual of, appreciating assets, if you will. And with Anthony Richardson, he is the poster child for that.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And at this spot at 105, I don't love the board. I got to be honest, because Jahmyr Gibbs would typically be my 104 ahead of Anthony Richardson, just based off of pure prospect profile. But he actually goes 55th overall to the Detroit Lions with the guy I compared him to, DeAndre Swift. in-house. So I don't love the landing spot for Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't love that he fell outside the top 50 as well. So I'm actually just going to go with a guy I think is just the best remaining player on the board. I know Will Levis went second overall to the Houston Texans. His future teammate is who I'm actually going to take here. Jordan Addison went 12th overall to the Houston Texans. To me, he is the wide receiver one in this class. He has a complete skill set, 3-level threat, verticality, short, play in the slot, play on the outside. We see it year in, year out. These route runners translate. It's something that is an undebatable fact about wide receiver classes in recent years. When it comes to people overthinking Justin Jefferson, people overthinking Devontae Smith, people overthinking Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson last year. These guys translate because their skill set is very easy to implement in the NFL. All you have to do is win against man coverage, and nobody really did it better than Jordan Addison, averaging like 4 yards per route run this past year against single man coverage. That is an absurd number. That is a number as high as Garrett Wilson and Drake London were last year. I think he's about on par as far as prospects with those guys. And based on the rookie seasons that those guys had, if he went to a team like Houston, which we got to imagine probably moves on from Brandon Cooks this offseason, Nico Collins and John Mechie are there, who are nice secondary pieces. But Jordan Addison would be the clear-cut alpha, in my opinion, in this offense, pairing up with Will Levis, who they took at second overall in this mock draft. I really love this landing spot for Addison. Just get him to a place where he can earn targets, just like we saw to Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson this past year.
Yeah, no, I really like the spot. I think, he's the type of receiver that is going to get overlooked. The Devontae Smith, the Justin Jefferson, that type of archetype where, they're not 6'4", 220-pound alpha X, style, DK Metcalf style wide receivers. However, they can separate and they can catch the ball. And that's all you really need at the next level, realistically. You get a guy like Jordan Addison in a place where, in Houston, realistically, we expect Brandon Cooks to be out. Nico Collins, while he can be, a fine 2-3, doesn't really profile as a true number one in the NFL. You get a guy like Jordan Addison, let him play some slot, let him play some Z on that offense. Obviously, pair up with a young quarterback with Will Levis situationally right away. I think this could be a guy that commands, 110 plus targets in his rookie season, especially in that spot. So really like that fit, really like Addison to the Texans. I think from the process standpoint, I do have to take his teammate here with Will Levis. And you kind of mentioned it. I want to take Jahmyr Gibbs, but I mean, when we're looking at it at a macro level, we got a second overall pick quarterback with the tools, the traits, obviously, inconsistent film, which is why he's even falling here. But a team took a chance on him at second overall. A team surrounded him with a number one wide receiver. This team in Houston clearly believes in him in this scenario to the point where he's going to be the starter regardless of what happens, probably throughout his rookie contract. And you're getting that level of, potential value accrual where if he does, shock expectations relative to what people kind of say about him, if he does become, a top 15 level real life quarterback, this is a guy with arm talent. This is a guy with mobility. This is a guy that in that landing spot with Jordan Addison added now realistically has a solid supporting cast to be able to develop, to be able to nurture. I think Will Levis going here is probably his floor. Again, for me personally, this is probably where he has to go realistically. Because in this scenario, yeah, you can argue, JSN, Jahmyr Gibbs, Quentin Johnston, you name it, but they all have their own risks. So if we're going to highlight the risks of Will Levis as a prospect, he's going second overall here. Why aren't we highlighting the risks of Gibbs? Why aren't we highlighting the risks of, QJ, JSN? They all have their own risks, except I'll take the quarterback that has the potential to be a first-round startup pick this time next year, this time the year after.
Yeah, and I think with Will Levis, too, I mean, DeMeco Ryans coming in, you probably assume they bring in some kind of 49ers-esque type of scheme. That would, definitely serve Will Levis's strengths. He's good at throwing on the move. He's good at, making quick reads and making quick decisions and playing in rhythm. So I think Will Levis would be a good fit for that scheme as well. And they actually, you said they surrounded him with the number one wide receiver. They also took a tight end at 33rd overall in this draft, according to Matt Miller as well. So yeah, I think building around him, building up a young offense to ascend. Maybe they, have some bumps and bruises the first year, but we see the flashes out of Levis. We see the flashes out of Addison and some of these other guys that they take in this scenario. That would make a lot of sense to me. And I think DeMeco Ryans showed, that he's going to probably be at least, Robert Saleh as like a head coach type of situation. So hopefully they can get a good offensive coordinator in there to help architect this offense. I'm on the board here with the next pick. And I got to be honest, again, I don't love where JSN went to the Seattle Seahawks. I don't love where Jahmyr Gibbs went 55th overall to the Detroit Lions. I'm personally just going to go with Gibbs because I think he probably deserves to go off the board. We don't exactly know how this would play out because he's now in a backfield with Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift. Him and DeAndre Swift have a pretty similar skill set. I think Gibbs right now would probably be about as good as DeAndre Swift as far as like a pure receiving back, but Swift would be like better in pass protection than what Jahmyr Gibbs would present. So we're probably not getting the greatest rookie season out of Jahmyr Gibbs, similar to what we would have said last year when Kenneth Walker was drafted to the Seahawks, because we knew, Rashad Penny was there. Maybe we don't get the biggest rookie season out of Kenneth Walker. I think this would be the type of pick that, you draft Jahmyr Gibbs if you're in like a long-term rebuild and you hope, this time a year from now, he's ascended a ton in value. Maybe DeAndre Swift moves on in free agency, whatever the case is, and Jahmyr Gibbs is there, going forward. And maybe, Jared Goff isn't long for that team as well, and they address quarterback in the 2024 class or something. You just kind of never know. So I don't want to rag on the landing spot too much, but I wish Gibbs had went higher with higher draft capital to a team where he can make an immediate impact. But he's a great player, man. He's an excellent receiver, great in space, elusive as hell, fast as hell. He's got a couple elite traits that, simply put, like a lot of other running backs, sans Bijan Robinson in this class, don't have. There's a lot of guys that you could say might be the RB2, the RB3, the RB4 in this class, but not many have the number of elite tools that Jahmyr Gibbs has.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. Honest to God, I do think that him and probably the next couple guys after that, you kind of see a tier break. I would say, these 7 guys in particular are the ones that should be the 7 guys off the board right now. But it's just murky with what that situation kind of represents. I mean, you kind of said it. His pro comp would be the guy that he would be backfield partnering with in Detroit. So I don't necessarily understand why Detroit would make this pick. But again, we can only really react. We can't really, understand why that would be. Why didn't they take, a bigger running back to pair with Swift, or why didn't a team in the top 50 take Jahmyr Gibbs? All we can really do is evaluate the running back. He got the draft capital. He's still a 2nd-round pick. He's still, as you said, elusive as hell, really good as a receiver. And although, the short term, like you said, is kind of murky with DeAndre Swift there, I'm assuming if Detroit would make this pick in the real life, they're going to be moving forward with Jahmyr Gibbs, and they're probably going to let Detroit or DeAndre Swift walk. So in that scenario, Jahmyr Gibbs, potentially the long-term running back behind a really good offensive line, a really good situation there in Detroit, top 5 level scoring offense they showed this year. Yeah, I think this is the proper pick. 108, I'm going to go with the next guy, and it kind of has a similar theme to Gibbs, where the short term is kind of murky. You don't exactly know what's going to look like in terms of volume, because obviously Gibbs competing with Swift. Same thing here with JSN competing with targets with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. The way I'm kind of assuming it is, you got a top 12 to 15 level quarterback there with Geno Smith potentially long-term. You got, in this scenario, Hendon Hooker developing behind him. So your quarterback situation theoretically should be set long-term. Not to mention Tyler Lockett, older player, don't exactly know how many more years he's going to be a Seattle Seahawk. You're getting a receiver with JSN that showed that he can command targets with other quality, like high caliber type of wide receivers. Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave at Ohio State, just this past year, not this season, but the year before that. He's really shown that target competition doesn't really matter for him. He's going to play the slot. He's going to get his targets, and he's not overly dynamic after the catch. He's not going to completely outrun somebody when he makes the catch realistically, but can he get open? Can he catch the ball? Can he get 100 plus targets in his rookie season? I definitely think that could be the case given how well he gets open underneath.
Yeah, this almost kind of feels like CeeDee Lamb to the Cowboys, where you get a highly decorated like analytics bro prospect that goes to a team that already has 2 established receivers, and he starts to slide down the board. And I mean, admittedly, I wouldn't fault anybody for taking JSN as high as like 104 even. Like there's no real precedent here between Anthony Richardson and JSN from 104 to 108 to say who you would take over the other guys. We kind of just, given the scenario, given the draft capital, given the landing spot, we kind of just made tiebreakers at that point. But as far as like a talent perspective, JSN definitely deserve to go even a little bit higher than this. So I'm back on the board here with 109. And I got to be honest, like I think I said this before, I don't love the fit of QJ going to the Ravens. And it's not necessarily that I don't love the Ravens as a landing spot. I just don't have a ton of faith in Quentin Johnston as a prospect in general. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take a guy who I do have a lot of faith in as a prospect in Michael Mayer, who is, in my opinion, the clear best tight end in the class. And in my opinion, one of the more prospect fatigued players that we're seeing from this 2023 prospect class. Because if you remember 2 years ago, when we started talking this class up, everybody said, oh, it's Bijan Robinson. It's Michael Mayer. Like he was like the second name that you said. Everybody knew he was going to be a great player. He's done nothing but produce at Notre Dame, posting tight end numbers of 30 plus, target shares, high PFF receiving grades, and everybody's suddenly sick of the guy. I don't know. I think this dude's immediately going to be like tight end 3 to 6 in Dynasty, depending on how you slice it once he gets into the NFL. And to me, when we look at just like startup value, who's going to go higher in a startup? Baltimore Ravens, Quentin Johnston's probably like a fifth, sixth round pick, maybe a fourth round pick if somebody's super, super high on the guy. Michael Mayer's probably in that same range at the tight end position, given the scarcity of that group. And especially if you, like us, we like to go more like flexible when we're doing startups, draft young players. And to me, Michael Mayer is kind of the type of guy that I would find myself drafting in a startup because he provides me that long-term appreciable value at a position of scarcity where we don't see a lot of, great prospects at that position. And Michael Mayer to me is kind of like a TJ Hawkinson plus.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's a good comp for him. TJ Hawkinson plus. You kind of mentioned it. I mean, every year he's been in college, he's gradually increased in terms of the ability to command targets. And you kind of mentioned it. He's probably the best, prospect, obviously, other than Kyle Pitts, since TJ Hawkinson, in the sense that he's going to get first round draft capital. Kyle Pitts was a unicorn, so I'm not even going to, play him on the same playing level, if you will. But first round draft capital, ability to command, maybe even 85 plus targets as a rookie. I understand the situation there in Cincinnati where, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase are going to command volume in their own right, but we know they're going to throw the ball. We know that Michael Mayer realistically is a lot better than what Hayden Hurst was for the Bengals this year. And Hayden Hurst was pretty productive at points this year for the Bengals. So getting that stability game to game with what Michael Mayer should represent could make Cincinnati probably one of the three scariest offenses in the entire NFL. So definitely like that pick there. I'm going to go next. And you kind of mentioned it with Quentin Johnston. I just can't pass the talent here. Obviously, clear top 3 receiver in this draft, in my opinion. Definitely has some holes in terms of his profile. Not, the most natural separator, kind of a body catcher, if you will. It's kind of weird that we're talking about a 6'4", 200 plus pound receiver as a body catcher, but that's kind of what he, represents at this point. If you were to make like a comp for him in terms of like the role, like he kind of has this like Deebo Samuel, AJ Brown-esque feel to him where get the ball in his hands, let him create after the catch, but obviously, not the level of nuance, not the level of polish that those guys kind of represented and, have grown into the NFL being, 2 of the top 10, 12 wide receivers in the NFL. I still think that would be, Quentin Johnston's ceiling where if he fully develops, if he can become that polished, down to down wide receiver, he can be, a top 10 level talent in the league. But realistically, it definitely is a projection. Not, the biggest fan of the landing spot here, but definitely a fan of the draft capital, 22nd overall going to Baltimore. But I just think, you pair him with, Mark Andrews, you pair him with Rashad Bateman, you let him, do his thing after the catch, kind of has, a Treylon Burks-esque rookie feel to him in the sense that we're expecting that team not to throw the ball a lot, but you got this raw, talented player with the ball in his hands that may not necessarily be in a full capacity role year one, but definitely I think will show flashes that he can be, a 1A or he could be, at least a number 2 wide receiver in the NFL by the end of his rookie season, kind of similar to what Treylon Burks showed in glimpses this year.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think QJ to me is starting to almost be in his own mini tier between the top 2 receivers to me are Addison and JSN, then QJ, and then you get like this tier of receivers that we're going to talk about in a second with, Josh Downs and Zay Flowers and Kayshon Boutte, who actually didn't go in the first 2 rounds of this mock draft, Jalen Hyatt, who went 25th to the Giants. I can pivot right into one of my picks. It would be between one of Zay Flowers, Josh Downs, or Jalen Hyatt for sure. Zay Flowers went 35th overall to the Chicago Bears in this mock draft. Josh Downs went 44th overall to the Atlanta Falcons, and Jalen Hyatt, like I said, went in the first round, 25th overall to the New York Giants. The first round draft capital matters, but I personally think Zay Flowers and Josh Downs are better prospects. I'm actually going to go, I'm going to go with Zay Flowers. You got comparable draft prospects between him and Downs. Zay Flowers goes to a situation where, aside from like Darnell Mooney, there's nobody really to speak of there. And even Darnell Mooney's kind of just been like a victim of circumstance, getting pretty much the only targets that Justin Fields threw this year. It's a run heavy offense, or at least it was last year. But I think Zay Flowers represents something that Justin Fields could use, which is a quick outlet, somebody who can get open quickly and, not have him, make through all these decisions, go through all of his progressions, and then eventually run the ball like we saw from him this year. If Zay Flowers can get open consistently and open quickly, then he could easily become Justin Fields' favorite target pretty quickly.
Get him on some whip routes, get him on some drags, get him in space, let him work after the catch. That's kind of what I see with a guy like Zay Flowers. Kind of in the mold of, last year, Jahan Dotson, 2 years ago, Elijah Moore, these 5'9", 185-pound, jitterbug wide receivers. Him and Downs both kind of represent that, where you kind of mentioned it. They're pretty much like the same player. in the sense that they're going to play the same role in the NFL. They're not going to play a pure X role, but can they be, a moving Z? Can they be, a nice slot wide receiver? I absolutely think that could be the case, ceiling type of range of outcome, a guy like Tyler Lockett, if they were able to become, top 15 fantasy wide receiver, it would be in that type of mold. So pivoting off, I mean, you mentioned it was Zay Flowers. I can just pick Josh Downs here because I don't know by the end of the cycle who I'm going to have higher between these guys. But what I do know is for the most part, they're probably just going to be neck and neck. They are very similar in terms of what they represent. Like I kind of said, you kind of mentioned the landing spot with Chicago, pairing with Justin Fields, giving him, a number one target, especially an intermediate target to get yards after the catch. I feel like Josh Downs can kind of provide that role for the Falcons. You got a big physical wide receiver on the outside with, Drake London, who you guys know we love. Kyle Pitts really stretching the seam from the tight end position. You get a guy like Josh Downs that can impact that intermediate game, whether it's, Desmond Ridder, whether it's, a veteran quarterback that they bring in, definitely give him, a third level to this offense because you got that, second level with Drake London. You got that third level potentially with Kyle Pitts. Now you're getting a guy with Josh Downs that can absolutely dominate that underneath. I think the Falcons, if they do get that proper quarterback set, can be one of the fastest rising offenses in the entire NFL. Tyler Algier showed out this year, really good run scheme. Offensive line really looked good. They have all the pieces and pieces in place, barring quarterback, to be a top 5 to 10 level offense, maybe be this year's Detroit Lions. So they make a move for a guy like Derek Carr, Jimmy Garoppolo, whatever veteran quarterback that they want to bring in. I think this could be one of the fastest rising offenses in the entire NFL.
Yeah, it'd be kind of hilarious to get Josh Downs standing side by side Kyle Pitts and Drake London, just the difference in size in those guys. But that's kind of like what you want a little bit, right? You have the physicality of those bigger receivers and your main running back with Tyler Algier, assuming he's like the starting guy going forward. You get yourself somebody fast, somebody jittery. We saw even, a guy like Olamide Zaccheaus make some plays this year for the Falcons. You kind of just get like a way better version of that out of Josh Downs, like you said, in that Elijah Moore, Jahan Dotson type of mold. I think Josh Downs to me is a slightly better prospect than Zay Flowers, just given the analytics profile.
Oh, for sure.
The fact that he's a junior coming out, he was productive with 2 quarterbacks there at North Carolina and highly, highly productive at that. So I like both of those guys. I think they're both like back end first, early second round type of rookie picks nonetheless. So that is the end of the first round of this mock draft. Again, we'll go over, you guys can see the actual rest of the Matt Miller mock draft that we haven't, taken. We didn't take Darnell Washington, who went 31st overall to the Eagles. I mean, Darnell Washington is kind of already, in my mind, become a guy that's going to be better for a real life NFL team than he is for fantasy because he's a fantastic blocker. He's a huge tight end. Teams are going to be able to deploy him in a lot of variety of ways, but I don't anticipate this guy being, superstar fantasy caliber tight end, especially not in a landing spot like Philadelphia where he'd be playing behind Dallas Goedert for the foreseeable future. Again, we mentioned Dalton Kincaid, 33rd overall to the Texans. Luke Musgrave, another tight end, going 45th overall to the Green Bay Packers. Sam Laporta, another tight end, going 48th overall to the Detroit Lions. Tucker Kraft, another tight end, going 62nd overall to the Kansas City Chiefs. And then, Rashee Rice going to the Jags, 56th overall. Tyler Scott going to the Panthers at 61st overall. Again, we would probably change the types of names. Like I would rather, if we saw, Kayshon Boutte coming off the board, 61st overall to Carolina, that would definitely be a great new weapon for CJ Stroud to throw to in this hypothetical scenario. So that was the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed, leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Make sure you stay tuned to everything we're doing over on Patreon. You guys can get access to our Dynasty Rankings Manifesto. You can get access to Dynasty Decisions. We're getting emails fast and furious from you guys wanting your teams covered on there. There's a big time queue. So if you want to skip the line, you can go ahead and sign up over there on Patreon. And also, we're going to be doing some more film reviews. I did the first one this past week with Anthony Richardson. It was a fun conversation with all of you guys in the Discord. And also, we're going to be doing Jahmyr Gibbs on Sunday. So if you want access to that, join up on the Patreon. You'll get access to our community Discord of over 700 people. You can also start leagues with people that are in there as well. And there's teams looking for orphans and all that kind of stuff. So everything over there on Patreon will be linked down below. You can check it out if you are interested. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.
Why you need the money?